So I kind of like to pride myself on shooting locally and just taking advantage of these lovely little pockets of woodland which are scattered around the local countryside. But right on my doorstep is the local forest, which is predominantly commercial plantation, which doesn't really interest me that much. But today I've decided to walk straight from my own front door and start to document something which is a little bit negative, to be honest. You might be able to see behind me here that there's quite a lot of destruction. And that's because we had such a hot and dry spring that we ended up with a series of 3 main fires, which, yeah, really have caused quite a lot of damage, and it's very sad. And I certainly don't want to glamorize the effect of this, but for me, it's interesting because although I wish it hadn't happened, it's a learning opportunity for me to kind of see the impact of these fires and see how quickly the woodland can regenerate from it as well. And some areas look worse than what they actually are. It's quite superficial, whereas other areas the damage is a little bit more severe. And it's certainly nothing on the scale of the big forest fires that we see around the world. But yeah, it's very graphic, it's very melancholic, it's very emotive, so I think it's quite important for me to take these photographs. So it's a very murky day, which kind of adds to the mood. So let's have a wander around and we'll talk about it a little bit more. So I found my first scene, which I'm quite interested in, and I don't know, I'm struggling how best to approach this, to be honest, because when you're presented with these very somber scenes, which, for all I know, all this destruction may have been caused on purpose, it's difficult to know how to approach it, because what I don't want to do is come across like I'm trying to benefit from this, because I'm certainly not. Certainly not commercially. The benefit from me is this learning process. But I feel a duty to document this. And I think that's important as photographers. You know, it's not all about the magical and the majestic and the big colourful sunsets and sunrises. I think sometimes we should document these things. The aesthetic of it is incredibly graphic, so it is interesting from a photographic point of view. I can see actually that there's new growth coming through already, grasses that I've not seen before coming through. So yeah, it's not all completely negative, but because it's local, it's close to my heart. So yeah, sad to see. I wish it wasn't so, but I will carry on with the documentation. But anyway, there's these groups of oak trees here which I've never photographed before. They've always been just sort of hidden behind the different foliage, but they've been exposed now, and the base of these trees is really badly scorched. But there's some silver birch as well, which seem to have coped with the fire really quite well. So it's a very moody scene. There's some lovely shapes. The blackness comes through quite well, certainly set against that foggy sky. And then hopefully it's one that I can come back to and take again a little bit later in the year. So I've just come down the hillside from those oak trees to an area which I've never walked through before, and it's a scene of very complex devastation. There's badly scorched birch trees, there's fallen trees, there's old deadfall, and what it's created is this very dynamic scene of all these lines going across in different directions. And it is a tricky one to make sense of, but I certainly think it'll be an interesting scene to come back to because it's very stark, it's very black, there's a lot of bad damage here. There's a fallen silver birch, which has clearly been fallen quite a while, I think, because there's new growth growing vertically from the main trunk. But that old original trunk still has its light coloured bark, which is contrasting with all the stark blackness around it. But I think because there's a lot of damage here and it's probably broken down a lot of the debris and the old logs, that kind of breaks down some of the nutrients and minerals, puts it back into the soil, makes it more fertile. So it'll be interesting to sort of see how this regenerates and how quickly the colour and greenery starts to come back through. So, like I said, a very complex scene, quite messy, difficult to make sense of because of all these different lines. So I've tried to make an image which is about the lines in different directions, with this fallen birch tree just disappearing off into the sky there. The sensor on the camera is getting quite confused because of all the darkness and the black. So it's overexposing the scene, so I'm just having to use a little bit of exposure compensation and just dialing it down by about a full stop, and that seems to be doing the trick. But yeah, very complex. Definitely one to come back to and see how it develops. But yeah, utter devastation here. So I've come to the location of the third and final fire, which was caused by accident, I believe, by a slightly foolish campfire. But as my back is starting to give me some issues, I'm going to call it a day. But what I'll do is I'll show some photographs from when I was here a few weeks ago with Joe Cornish, which was a really interesting afternoon. Very mixed emotions again, but the woodland floor was very black, so very graphic in its aesthetic again. And it was still smouldering, actually. There was pockets of smoke coming up here and there, even the odd flame. So apart from the smell, it filled the woodland with quite an interesting atmosphere. But I hope this video hasn't come across as too downbeat. That's not the intention. I think these types of documentations, like I said, are very important and can be a very important learning process. And I've said many times about how important connection is to the subjects that we shoot and the environments in which we create, and all this can do is heighten that appreciation. And it certainly shows the fragility of these places, which sometimes you can take for granted when it's on your doorstep. You know, one day it's there and the next day it's gone. So I think it is important to come out and document these events, even if it does have a negative undertone. But there is some positivity. I can see this recovering already. There's ferns starting to unfurl out the ashes, so I think it will start and look pretty good, even just perhaps a few months from now. But Thank you very much for watching this episode, and as always, I hope to see you for the next one.